In this course, you learned about the basics of working with React. Let's take a few moments to recap the key topics that you learned about. In the opening lesson, you received an introduction to React. During this introduction, you learned about React, became familiar with how React is used in the real world, and you learned how to make the most of the content in this course to ensure that you succeed in your goals. You then moved on to the next lesson, in which you learned about React components. In this lesson, you learned how to explain components, their architecture, and how they are rendered. Create components and update them using JSX. Describe how folders are structured in a React project and how this benefits development. And you then demonstrated your knowledge of how to import components. In the next lesson, you explored how to use components in greater detail. This means that you can now declare functional components with props and pass them to another component. Use JSX to add styling to components. Save styles so that they can be reused later, and embed JavaScript expressions in attributes. Next, you began the second module, which was focused on the roles of data and state in React. In the first lesson of this module, you learned about dynamic events and how to handle them. You can now identify the most common types of events. Use some common event handlers in your code. Use different types of syntax to write event handlers. And you demonstrated understanding of the concept of user-triggered events. You then learned about the relationship between data and events. As a result, you can now describe how data flows between parent and child components and explain the concept of state in React and how it is managed. You were also introduced to hooks and know that you can use them to extend the functionality of state. And you are able to identify some common use cases for stateful and stateless components. In the third module, you were introduced to navigation, updating, and assets in React. By completing the first lesson, you can now identify the basic types of navigation on websites, create a basic navigation route with a React router library, explain how components can be rendered conditionally, use several different approaches to set up conditional rendering logic. In the final lesson of this module, you explored assets in React and how to use them. You can now explain what assets are and the best ways to store them. Use assets that are embedded in data files and use audio and video assets in your components. You've reached the end of this course recap. It's now time to try out what you've learned in the graded assessment. Good luck.